Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Squatcast. I'm Adam from Squared Up, and today I'm joined by our Chief Technology Officer, Richard Jones. Hey Rich.
Hi Adam, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Thanks for dropping in. I think it's not your first time joining a Squared Up live broadcast. I think you've been on a Dashboard Fridays or two in the past, so good to see you back. Today, I think, is a pretty interesting topic. I think we're being sort of partly self-serving here because we very often get asked by people to fill out these huge, onerous security questionnaires that take up loads of time. And so we thought, what better way to answer a few of those questions in a nice, formal, informal, friendly way than by doing it here on Squatcast. So yeah, that's what we'll dig into today. I think that it's probably useful to set some context for sort of how the app works. So maybe you could walk us through the platform architecture first, give people an idea of the kind of services we use in the background.
Yeah, sure. Let me just share this a bit bigger. So yeah, hopefully you can see the squared up platform architecture diagram. There's probably a few really important points to note about the architecture. The first one I'm going to mention is that the kind of back end, the bit that runs in public cloud, is 100% serverless. So there's no VMs to manage. There's no container pods to orchestrate. There's no databases to kind of provision and maintain. So I'm too old in the tooth or too grey in the hair, if you like, for dealing with all that maintenance and that headache. So wanted something simple. We could just write our code, deploy it, run it, and it would scale automatically for us. So yeah, it's 100% serverless, the back end. The second kind of thing that is probably immediately jumps out at people when they look at the architecture is that it is multi-cloud. So it's not just AWS or just Azure. We actually utilize both. We didn't want to kind of tie ourselves to one particular public cloud or another. So because we knew we wanted to go serverless, we looked at which was more mature in the kind of serverless services that were offered, and that was AWS. They've been around for longer in terms of Lambda and Dynamo. So we sort of started there, but then we wanted to do kind of like horses for courses. So we look at a particular capability we need in our product, and then we'd assess the service in AWS and in Azure and even in Google Cloud and other public clouds, and then choose what's right for us rather than just tying ourselves to one particular cloud. So we're using half a dozen or more AWS services. Lambda in particular is where our code actually runs. That is serving API requests on the client, or importantly, plugging into the cloud data sources that the customer has, or persisting data to one of our data stores. But then we needed certain technologies that we were looking for, where we just thought the Azure service was slightly ahead or slightly a better choice. So for example, we needed a graph database to store kind of an index of all the, I never know whether to call them objects, entities, resources. There's so many words for things that are in a data source. That we wanted to index those and the correlation between them. We knew we wanted a graph database, but at the time AWS Neptune was kind of in preview, it didn't even exist, whereas Cosmos had been in market, GA, for a number of years, and it met our needs. Another example, B2C, most of our customers are logging in with Microsoft accounts, and that had support for Microsoft accounts out of the box, as you might expect, whereas AWS Cognito, a bit more complicated to configure. And then finally, this one's quite interesting actually. So I guess when people think of AWS, you think of cloud native, born in the cloud applications, whereas Microsoft Azure, probably a lot of their market share is largely from historical Windows data center presence, where people have migrated or lift and shifted to the cloud. So they've always had that hybrid environment, that complexity to deal with. And so I guess that's why they had the Azure Relay Hybrid Connections, the service that we utilize there to be able to talk to on-premise data sources. And for our enterprise customers, that's super important. They probably got System Center, SolarWinds, VMware, or some other on-prem data source they want us to connect to. So that's where we do, we're often asked, do you have an agent? We're agentless, but we have an optional agent. So if you do want to connect to those on-premise data sources, we have an on-prem agent. That is the one thing that's not serverless.
Yeah.
So you either deploy it, you can deploy it on Windows or Linux, and it's a service daemon or a Docker container. So nice and easy to deploy. It auto updates, auto downloads the sort of plugins for connecting to the different data sources. So it's nice and self-managing. But that will then make, in terms of open up firewalls and things, it's only ever initiated outbound from on-prem to cloud. But once it's initiated that connection, it upgrades itself from HTTPS into a full-blown duplex WebSocket connection, so that the cloud can talk to the on-prem agent as well as the on-prem agent talking to the cloud. So that's the multi-cloud part of it. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was that it's also multi-region. So you'll notice it says there sort of Virginia or Ireland. So data residency is super important to our customers. And so you get to choose whether your data is hosted in the United States, in which case it'll be in Virginia, or in Europe, in which case it'll be in Ireland. And we may well support other regions in the future. But yeah, it's a serverless, multi-cloud, multi-region architecture.
Now that gives me a nice segue into the next question, but I'm not going to take it immediately and talk about the kind of data we store. I was curious to get your take on whether serverless means problemless, or whether it just means it's a problem that we can't solve when there is a problem.
It's certainly less problems, that's for sure. There are still problems in terms of, you think, all scales just automatically, but with scale comes cost, and so there's still a cost element. So yes, it's pay per use. You only pay for what you're using. It's not running, nothing's happening, you're not paying for it. But in terms of getting that scale, you still allocate resources, you allocate memory, and then the CPU is apportioned based on how much memory you get. You get CPUs. You got to kind of. And if you allocate more, then you get more CPU and it will run faster. Running faster means less cost, but you've allocated more, which means more cost. And you've got to fine tune that, where you need extra power, because otherwise you'll suffer from performance. Yeah. And it doesn't always mean that less power means less cost, because it can run quicker. So getting that right is a bit of a black art.
I think one of the sort of funny things with using like SaaS and PaaS services is when there are problems, we can't always do anything to fix them, but typically they're incredibly visible because everyone else is finding that problem as well. Like Azure Authentication's broken, or Lambda's down in East US, or what SaaS apps in the world aren't affected by some of these big platform outages. So maybe it gives us a bit of cover because we can say, well, everyone's down, but equally it's very visible when it happens. So yeah, pros and cons, but no running VMs, no patching machines, none of that nonsense these days.
Exactly. Yeah, more time for the engineering team to write code and deliver value to customers.
Yeah, great. So lots of services in lots of clouds. Security people freaking out everywhere because we don't have control of these systems, and all their data's flying around in the public internet and all this kind of stuff. So let's talk about the data that we are storing in our platform, because we stream a lot of the dashboard contents. When you're seeing a metric from Azure DevOps, for example, we're not putting that in a database that we're holding somewhere. That's being streamed from your tool into our UI, and there's pretty much nowhere along the journey where we're sort of holding on to it. What do we store, and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. And like you say, I like to say that we connect, we do not collect. So we're not yet another data lake where you're collecting all your metrics. We stream that live on demand. But what we do store, so we've got 3 repositories, as you can see in the kind of architecture diagram here. So if I start with our graph database, which delivers the kind of map feature of our product. It's kind of a metadata index or catalog of what's in the various data sources that you connect to. So I'll give some examples maybe. So if you're connecting to an APM tool like Dynatrace or New Relic or something, then it'll be things like applications, databases, hosts, synthetic monitors. And so those assets or resources are cataloged in the graph, and any relationships between them. So, this synthetic is monitoring this application. We know about that relationship. So it's really, really just kind of metadata. I'm often asked, what PII do we store? Well, kind of not a lot. So we do have user profiles. Obviously, users log in, and that's just an email address of a user that is used to authenticate. And that's kind of all we store. But obviously, if a customer, we have, for example, a Salesforce plugin for connecting to Salesforce, and if you use that, then we are gonna then store in our graph databases accounts, contacts, leads, users from Salesforce. So obviously that was likely to contain PII, but it's under the customer's control. If they don't want that stored by us, then don't use that data source, don't use that plugin. So that's our graph database. The other repository there, we use S3 buckets for blobs. What do I mean by that? Well, basically images. So we have image tiles where you can upload an image to show on a tile. They're stored there. We also have our pretty amazing live diagram feature. So it's an SVG diagram, which you can add links to squared up entities like dashboards and workspaces that have health state. And your diagram, it's called live diagram because your diagram literally comes to life with a RAG status on various diagram elements, which is amazing. So those diagrams are stored in S3 as well. And then finally, we do notifications. So if your tile monitor changes state, maybe it goes red, we can optionally include a preview of the tile so you can see why it went red. Oh, a metric fell below a threshold. And those tile previews images are also stored in those S3 buckets as well.
Nice. Okay. So from a just in terms like in that scenario there, we're indexing the plugins, so we're storing the entities like a like phone book, right? We don't know what you had for breakfast, but we know how to get in touch with you, that kind of stuff. So quite lightweight, and it's all user opt-in, right? You choose to add the plugin. With things like Salesforce, you can optionally index, objects from your CRM, that kind of stuff, and then images for dashboards in buckets. I think Dynamo was the last.
Yeah, that's probably the most important one, and the reason it's most important is because there's a lot of man hours, likely man or woman hours that have gone into it, because it's you create workspaces in Squared Up to start with. Those workspaces have names, descriptions, settings such as access control, who can access the dashboards in that workspace. Then you've got the dashboards themselves, and every dashboard contains one or more tiles, and those tiles have configuration. So there's a lot of, if you're doing it through our user interface, which is most common, certainly to start with, there's a lot of hours have gone into that. We do have APIs for doing it as well, and we have a Terraform provider for automating a lot of that configuration. But you don't want to lose that configuration, so that that is important, and that's what we store in Dynamo, so what we call our config data. So users, dashboard sharing settings, workspaces, dashboards, groups, all that sort of good configuration data.
Yeah. Okay, so when we're talking about the stuff that only Squared Up knows about, that's primarily just that configuration, like you say, it's the setup you've done, the dashboards you've built, that kind of stuff. But if we were to face problems with, say, Cosmos, for example, that gets rebuilt by plugins importing, so Dynamo definitely, like you say, sounds like the most important part of the puzzle. It's where all the unique data is. So how do we, a common question in one of these security questionnaires is, tell us about your backup policy. So tell us about your backup policy, Rich. What's going on?
So yeah, even though we don't need, like you mentioned, the graph database is really like a cache. It's an index of lots of data sources. So we can blow that away and recreate it, which we can do it really quickly. We back it up anyway, belt and braces. Why not? It's cost effective. So we do back it up. Same with the blobs in S3, even though they're images that have been uploaded by our customers, the customer may not have it to hand anymore. It might be a diagram they've lost maybe. So we do back it up anyway. So they're backed up kind of daily. But the really important one, which is the configuration database, because say man hours have gone into it, that is continuously backed up. So, every time there's a change, it is backed up automatically, which means we have point in time recovery. So any point in time, we can recover that configuration database. Now, you might think, well, in practice, when would you ever do that? How often do, AWS Dynamo tables get corrupted where you actually need to restore an entire backup? Probably never, or very rarely. Much more likely scenario is, accidents happen. So a customer might accidentally delete a load of dashboards, which they configured manually through the UI. They might have created 50, 100 dashboards and accidentally go and delete them. So we actually have the ability to do granular restore from those point-in-time backups. So we can restore one particular customer, or what we call a tenant, without impacting any other tenants. So that's a really powerful feature that so if customers lose everything, it doesn't matter. We can quickly regenerate everything from those point-in-time backups rebuild the graph, and we have backups of everything we store basically.
Do we ever have have we had any causes to do that for real yet, apart from outside of proofing things, testing things?
We have in the dev test. I'll talk about our different environments a bit later, but in our dev test environment, we've had accidents where a developer has accidentally gone and deleted things from Dynamo, or deleted a whole load of workspaces by accident, or someone doing testing and didn't use Terraform to do it and then deleted everything. I want to do that again, so we've had to use it for those sort of purposes, but not in production.
Good. So we know it works, though. That's always the next question. Do you actually know this works? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, we run tests regularly against it to check that it's all still working.
Good. Yeah. Okay. So even though we're not really storing any of the customer sort of own data, we are obviously making it available to people. We're connecting to lots of tools. We're giving people, lots of people access to this data through Squared Up and through our API. Encryption's a big part of that. So, the data we're storing, what does that look like? And also, obviously we use HTTPS everywhere. And are there any things worth calling out on encryption?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, encryption in transit all over HTTPS, including obviously from the client to the back end, but also from the on-prem agent. Everywhere is HTTPS, but also importantly, encryption of data at rest. So all the data in both the graph database and the configuration database are all encrypted. But we actually go kind of above and beyond that as well. So for really sensitive things, so for example, when you're configuring a data source, you've normally got to provide a password or an API key for us to connect to GitHub or to your customer's AWS account or whatever. So those are actually going to double encrypted. So we encrypt them as soon as they're entered and they're saved. We encrypt them, and then we store them in Dynamo, where Dynamo encrypts them again, so they can double encrypted at that point. The reason we do that is so that when we come to use them and we read them from Dynamo and we pass them sort of between our Lambda functions, for example, they stay encrypted. So even though they've been read from Dynamo, they're no longer at rest, if you like. They're still securely in our backend, but being passed around. So if reason we do it, if we accidentally logged something out, we wouldn't want those to be logged in the clear. We want them to be encrypted. So they stay encrypted everywhere where they're passed around. And it's literally only at the point of use where we need to say connect to Azure DevOps or to GitHub, where we decrypt them and use them and then throw them away immediately afterwards. So yeah, decrypted at point of use. So kind of double encrypted, if you like, at rest.
And I assume the ability to decrypt those keys, those secrets, is pretty well guarded. I couldn't just get into AWS somehow and just start getting access to customer passwords, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. There's a number of things we do to secure our AWS accounts. First thing to note, I guess, it's all single sign-on. So there's no additional passwords that somebody could lose or anything. So it's all single sign-on with MFA. So it's all MFA protected everywhere. So for employees logging in. And then we have kind of segregation of duties. So we have multiple accounts. We have our dev test account. Now, typically that, the engineering team will have access to that. And there's no customer data in the dev test account. So they pretty much have full access to dev test. And then there's our pre-prod or staging account, which is identical to the production account, but doesn't, again, have any customer data. Now, a small number of QA and automation engineers would have access to that pre-prod staging environment. And then finally, there's the production environment, which obviously does have customer data, where less than a handful of people, which includes myself, have anything more than read-only access. So the support team would have read-only access. But even that segregation of roles there between support and admin, even within that support access, when I say read-only, there's read-only and there's read-only. So it's read-only in that they can read the things that they need. So access to logs for troubleshooting. They can read the resources in the AWS account, but not what's within those resources. So for example, they can list Dynamo tables, but they can't read what's in those tables, which is where customer data is. So even that read-only access that I mentioned, you still can't read customer data. So if we ever did need to look at customer data because we were troubleshooting a corruption of data, we would always ask the customer's permission. And one of those less than a handful of people that have anything more than read-only access would then, once we've got that customer's permission, go and be able to look at the data to see, yes, is it corrupted, and what can we can do to address it.
Nice. Okay. I guess we use single sign-on with Azure as well to access the tenants that host Cosmos and Azure B2C.
It's all the same, basically, different subscriptions, different tenants and subscriptions, and Azure with, again, different permissions for the dev, the test, and the production.
Yeah. Okay. While we're on the subject, it's probably just worth touching on sort of Azure B2C and what that means for in-app access control, what the part that the customer sees. So anybody signing up to Squared Up will be presented with three options. Do you want to sign in with a Microsoft account, a Google account, or create a username and password? So that's what Azure B2C does for us, right? That's our identity provider that we use.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of more of an identity broker, really, because the provider is obviously Microsoft or Google. We also support a fourth one now as well, Okta. So if those using Okta, we support that as well. So it's more an identity broker. So it saves us having to integrate directly with Microsoft and Google and Okta and username password. We just deal with one set of APIs of B2C, and it does all that extra, the talking to the identity provider for us. So
yeah,
it just makes our life a lot easier. But even with this, obviously we're nowhere near passwords there, but even with the username password option, we Squared Up cannot read those passwords. They are stored in B2C. We cannot read them.
Nice. Okay. So yeah, users are pretty well protected from that point of view. And the reason I brought it up is a few enterprises, they always want to, they want to bring their own authentication. Why we added Okta recently, but even from a Microsoft point of view, if you're signing in with an Azure, Entra ID account, an Active Directory account, we're going to be using your Active Directory policies, your MFA policy, that kind of stuff. It's the customers effectively bringing their own credentials. If it's a Google Workspace account, it's the same deal. It's if MFA is enforced, you will be prompted, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a really important point here, because we get asked for it a lot, is, customers ask for sign-in logs. I want to see when someone's signed in or they haven't signed in, when they've successfully signed in and failed attempts. And it's like, they're your logs. So if it's you're using your Microsoft account or your Google account, they exist in your directory, not ours. We don't have those logs. They're in the customers. So the customer can self-service there and go and see those sign-in logs for themselves if they're using an identity provider. So that's nice.
That maybe actually leads to kind of a nice thing we could add to the Azure plugin. We could build an Azure Sentinel dashboard that shows all of your user activity in Squared Up Cloud. That's pretty interesting. So once someone's in Squared Up, we then sort of carry those user credentials through to things like whether you can access a workspace, and if you can, whether you're a reader or whether you can author dashboards, whether you can manage the workspace. We also apply those permissions to data sources as well. So you can lock a particular data source down to a certain user. So I'd imagine in this context here, for our internal dashboarding, all of the very sensitive AWS accounts, for example, could be limited to just workspaces you use, for example, and not broadly available to the whole company.
Yeah, that's right. So the access control, like you say, is kind of two levels to it. Is the data that you can access, and then there's the workspaces which contain the dashboards. So you might have access to particular data, say in GitHub, and then you with that access, you then choose which workspaces you add that data source to, which ones you'll allow data from GitHub there, say, to be dashboarded for, and then a separate set of permissions on the workspace to say who can actually see those dashboards. Do you have full control, or can you edit dashboards? Are you an author, or are you read only and you can only view those dashboards?
Yeah. Okay.
And you probably mentioned API keys as well, similar. So we don't just, standard practice, we don't store API keys. We store a hash of the API key. So we can't, it's up to the customer to keep that API key safe. I think we store the last 4 characters of a very long API key just so we can list them in the UI. But it's then up to the customer to then, make sure that's kept safe. We can't recover it for you if you lose it, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
You have to rotate it and create a new one if you do lose it.
So I guess one other question that just sort of came to mind, again, sort of working with a customer on one of those hellish security questionnaires, was around sort of restricting access. Like, can you restrict where people can log into Squared Up from? And actually, if you're using Azure, you can prompt it. And in their specific case, if they weren't on their Office IP address, they'd have to be on their VPN in order for their Azure, their Azure identity provider to allow them to log in. So because we have this approach of sort of bring your own provider, I guess it means we give the customer a lot of flexibility to make this as difficult as they like, really.
Yeah, you get all the benefits that come with that, exactly. So whether you're using MFA or not, we're often asked that, and it's like, well, it's up to you. It's your Microsoft account. It's your settings.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that is actually, I think, for a lot of our customers who have been with us for a long time using our on-prem product, and they're sort of in that journey from their own data center into Azure. You know, as Microsoft people tend to do, they go to Azure when they want to migrate all their VMs. That is often like a bit of a sticking point. Actually, is bringing that understanding that like you're not setting up a squared up login. You're logging into Squared Up with your login, and it's in your control, and it's your logs and your policies. And yes, I think it seems kind of simple when you just click on the Microsoft button and it pops up with your own company logo. You kind of get it, but a lot of people, I think, want that confidence before they're willing to click that button for the first time.
Yeah. Something else we've done recently, actually, in that area is some customers want to make sure that their employees don't then accidentally go and press the Google button and use their personal Gmail account. So we do actually now have the ability in our enterprise tier for custom domains. And with a custom domain, you have the ability to then have settings to lock that down, say only the Microsoft button will appear, or only the Google button will appear, or only the Okta option will appear. So which authentication mechanisms you support with that custom domain feature.
Yeah. And I think that quite rightly sounds like an enterprise feature.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, nice. You mentioned, with a smile on your face, of course, you mentioned, devs occasionally in the dev environment accidentally blowing Dynamo to pieces, all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's worth just sort of talking about our general dev practices here at Squared Up, sort of how we approach, how we approach testing and, use of third-party code and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. So we use trunk-based development. So there's kind of a master branch, and then when developers work, they create a feature branch or a branch to fix a bug on, and then they raise, when it's ready, they raise a pull request. Now that pull request has so many checks. I can't tell you, numerous checks that happen before they can merge that pull request. All the unit tests have to pass. All the automation tests have to pass. They then have to get a minimum of 2 code reviews from other members of the engineering team. And importantly, they have to have a member of the QA team approve it. And what that means, it's not just looking at it, it's actually going and performing the manual testing that's required as well. So as well as the unit and automation tests that, a QA engineer has gone and done any required manual testing. Once, documentation impact, et cetera, once the whole set of things have passed, then it can be merged. Which means it goes on to the master branch. And at that point, it goes on to the pre-prod staging environment. And as I say, that's identical to production environment in every way. So the dev test environment has branches from many developers in lots of different states. So certainly not a reliable environment. Pre-prod is reliable; it's identical to production. And then as long as once it's merged and the smoke and automation tests then run in pre-prod as well. Provided that all succeeds, it will then go to production, where another set of smoke tests run in production. And even then, it's still not live. So we have what we call blue-green deployment. So imagine the blue deployment is live right now for all customers, the blue release number. And then a new release happens. So no customer gets that, even though it's sat there in production, the release is in production, available for use, but customers don't have it. We then switch all Squared Up users, the whole of the engineering team, all the sales guys that are doing demos regularly, and everyone in Squared Up is then on to the latest version. And then we have an arbitrary amount of time we can, by default, we use 48 hours, but we can shorten it, we can lengthen it, where it's used by Squared Up before we say, okay, it's now gone through unit automation, manual testing, and internal kind of, beta testing, if you like, with the whole company using it before then we say, okay, that's ready to go live, and the blue release becomes the green release, the latest release number, and all customers get it. And with that, we have immediate rollback, because if we did, we didn't spot in that 48-hour window, and then we did spot it because the customer reports something, we can either quickly fix something, or we can roll it back to the previous release with within seconds, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's what that blue-green deployment gives us.
It's probably not a shameful thing to admit that we've had to pull that button a few times, right? Like it's a useful step to happen that sometimes you can't do, especially if you're releasing on-prem software. Something that is going out into the wild, people have to install. Like it really has to be ready to go at that point. But we have had a few occasions where there's been an unexpected side effect with something, and we have been able to pause it without impacting customers, even though it is in production in effect.
Yeah, in both directions actually. Sometimes where you want to. We're investigating something that might or might not be an issue, so we extend that 48 hours. And other times where you need to rush through, it's an urgent fix, it's an important fix, you need to rush it through, and so we can override it and push it straight through. So both kind of directions, and we've made use of both. But it is a nice part of that deployment, blue-green deployment to production kind of process.
Nice. Okay. It's worth mentioning as well. I think we when we're demoing Squared Up to people, it's nice to sort of understand the tools that we're plugging into, the things that we demo. And at Squared Up, we use GitHub, we use Jira, we use Azure DevOps. We're like many software companies in that respect. Are we as bad as one of those software companies that's using Visual Studio Team Server, and we've all got to RDP into virtual machines to access the code base, or are we just enforcing sort of good use of SaaS tools and developers just work on their own laptops?
Yeah, good use of SaaS tools. So again, it's all multi-factor authentication with GitHub. We don't allow any credentials on a user's laptop. So for example, connecting to AWS, we don't allow normal IAM users. It's all done through single sign-on, so you get temporary credentials. So we have policies to enforce that no AWS credentials can exist on users' laptops in case that laptop is lost or stolen, things like that. I guess something else to mention as well is kind of sort of vulnerabilities as well. So we, like all modern software, there's a heavy use of open source libraries, and we need to make sure that we're up to date with those. So we make use of GitHub's Dependabot for alerts. So when a dependency that we're using has a vulnerable version, we get an alert, and they have a security update feature which automatically raises the PR, and it goes to our normal pull request process. Then a developer will review it. A QA will have a look and make sure that it's tested if it needs testing that later version, which obviously it does, because you're changing the version of the piece of software that we use. So it goes through the normal release process, but yeah, we get those alerts and that automatically pull requests to get us to a fixed version. And then in addition to that, we're trying to we subscribe to various cyber report and advisory notifications. We try and subscribe, the security team subscribe to different ones, because there's only so many you can read and keep up with. But the National Cyber Security Centre, the Cyber Vigilance Digest, etc. There's various ones that we keep abreast of and people subscribe to.
Good. Well, it certainly sounds like we know what we're doing, and it certainly sounds like you know what you're talking about. So I'm sure we can put a lot of faith in everything we've covered in the last half an hour. It's probably then worth sort of as a measure of proof to say that sort of last year we went for ISO 27001 certification and have it. We got it. Is there anything worth sort of mentioning on that? Like, what's the people often look for that logo, the SOC 2 logo, the ISO logo on websites. Like, what does that actually mean that we have it? Does it mean we don't have to fill out questionnaires? That would be good.
Oh, if only. So yeah, we've had the ISO 27001 certification since 2022 in the autumn. So 18 months or so now. And yeah, well, I did think it would reduce the number of security questionnaires we fill in, but certainly not. It's a good starting point, because a lot of the questionnaire questions around procedures and policies you have in place and how often they're reviewed and audited. And of course, all that is part of our ISMS, part of that certification. But yeah, we do still answer a lot of kind of custom security questionnaires, and they're always similar questions, but worded slightly differently. So something we're trying to do to make that process smoother is so many acronyms, I apologize these in advance, but something called a CAIQ, which is a Consensus Assessment Initiative Questionnaire. It's kind of an industry accepted way to document the security controls that exist in SaaS services. So I think it's like 260 something questions that we have to answer to ascertain our compliance to cloud controls matrix. So we're going through that process at the moment. We're about halfway through, so it is quite time consuming. But the idea being, once we have that, we will register it. So it goes into a an online registry, the Cloud Security Alliance's registry, where customers can download it. We'll also put it on our website so it can be downloaded. And so then what we can say is, there's 260 something answers there. Have a look at that first. And then if there's anything additional, which hopefully there's not because it's pretty thorough, then we'll try and answer anything that's not covered in our CAIQ. So I'm hoping to get that done, the next sort of couple of months, to reduce the amount of sort of custom security questionnaires we have to fill in. So it'll tell you everything you need to know, everything that we've covered today, and hundreds of other answers to questions that customers and prospects might want to know about.
Nice. So for those of you who didn't catch it, that's the CSA's CMM CIAQ, right? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and there's a registry called a STAR registry, which is Trust and Assurance, acronym central.
Yeah, it is a really good initiative because you see it very commonly on other SaaS vendors' websites. They'll have their CAIQ sort of published, so you can just get it. You can hopefully we'll move to a world where people just take that as their evidence, and it's not all custom security questionnaires left, right, and center.
Yeah, it is slowly but surely becoming the kind of de facto standard, fortunately.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and obviously, I think we are obviously very committed to maintaining our ISO certification, and the effort it takes to fill out these questionnaires, the ones that we're going to be able to put publicly. Hopefully, that does answer a lot of questions for people. One thing that does come up that I already know the answer to this, but it's just worth sort of bringing up. People often certainly government clients in the US will often talk about FedRAMP, which is another sort of, I guess, it's an assessment that you're sort of fit to sell to government, that you sort of meet all their criteria, and that is a huge undertaking that we aren't currently looking at doing. So I just thought it was worth sort of getting that down on paper in this episode, that we aren't right now pursuing FedRAMP, but we may, if someone wants to throw a few $100 million at some squared up licensing, of course we will.
Yeah, it is a long and complex process, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be sponsored by other members and various things to sort of get into it. So yeah, a lot of our business is with US based companies, and FedRAMP is often asked about. So it's not a no, but it's not a right now. ISO 27001 is certainly where we want to be right now, and the CAIQ should certainly help speed up the process for a lot of customers who have that very security conscious approach to SaaS tools. Yeah. Well, I think I don't know if we met the brief for this of like making it fun, but we've been talking for a while and it hasn't felt boring at any point. So gold stars all around, I'd say. I think that's gone reasonably well. Is there anything else that you wanted to call out that we haven't touched on for this with regards to security, or questions that you've been asked by the sales team or anything like that?
I think we've probably covered all the things that are frequently asked, but yeah, watch this space for our CAIQ, which will answer all the detailed questions. I guess it's from my point of view, I kind of should have said in my introduction, I kind of joined Squared Up sort of 4 years ago, and the main reason I joined was definitely to architect and help build the SaaS platform that we've just been talking about, and the architecture that we saw. I've kind of had my fun now, if you like, and now it's all ISO 27001, which, although super important, is a lot less fun. So, but we're trying to do the best we can to make it fun, if you like. Yeah,
nice. Okay, well, at least try and make it easy for people when they want to ask us questions about this. I'm sure at some point we'll have a lovely flashy security page on the homepage with all of this laid out, certificates for things, that kind of stuff. But yeah, for now, a knowledge base is actually a really good place to go. There's a version of that architecture diagram in there, and certainly a lot around the like the data sub processors we use. People outside of our own application where we send data, our analytics tools, our CRM, they're all sort of listed in our knowledge base for anyone interested.
All the types of data that we store are listed as well. I mean, I talked about it today, but it's listed in our knowledge base.
Yeah.
The kind of algorithms we use for encryption, those sorts of details are on there as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, we're just about on time. I'll go ahead and wrap us up. Well, first, thanks, Rich, for coming on and sharing all that information with us. Questions can always be asked about this topic or any others on Community Answers. So just head to community.squaredup.com, If you're using Squared Up, you have any requests, you have any feedback, we have a great change log with a plugin roadmap. You can request changes through feedback.squaredup.com. Or if you want to just ask a really specific question, feel free to get in touch through squatcast@squaredup.com, and myself or one of our colleagues will get on and answer that for you. But yeah, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Richard. Bye-bye.